Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Coming up, China's GDP grows by 5% in the first quarter. Also in this period, Hong Kong market ranks first in IPO fundraising. And French lawmakers approved a bill to ease the return of looted artworks. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, China's economy grew 5% to over 33 trillion yuan or $4.8 trillion in the first quarter. The National Bureau of Statistics said the national economy got off to a good start, with the development showing greater resilience and vitality. It said the growth of production and supply accelerated, market demand continued to improve, and high-quality development advanced with new and positive momentum. Da Kai breaks down the numbers.
A steady and strong start despite uncertain external environment. According to National Bureau of Statistics, China's first quarter GDP grew by 5% year on year, and that is 0.5 percentage points faster than the fourth quarter last year. The industrial output of the country expanded 6.1%, and one thing we should mention is the high-tech manufacturing expanding more than 12%. Products like industrial robotics as well as lithium battery posting particularly strong gains. And on the demand side, retail sales expanded 2.4%, with service spending or service consumption growing faster, that is up 5.5%. Also, we saw upticks on fixed asset investment as well as trade. Now, officials from the National Bureau of Statistics said that this year marks the opening year of the 15th five-year plan for China. All major indicators in the first quarter have shown upticks, with new growth drivers expanding rapidly, and that helped the entire economy getting off to a solid start. But they also acknowledged that there are challenges remaining. One thing they mentioned is the imbalance between the supply side and the demand side.
That was Da Kai on China's economic performance. For more, joining us online is Li Luan, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Li.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, China's GDP grew 5% in the first quarter, at the top of the government's target range of 4.5% to 5%. So how did the economy withstand the current external shocks and global uncertainty?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of multiple factors. So we have seen, for example, in quarter one, the GDP grew by 5% year on year. If you look at, for example, the industrial output, it's rising by more than 6%, services more than 5%, and the total goods trade more than 15%. So the growth was supported by both the production sector, also the demand sector, especially services, and also the trade sector together. So I think that one of the major reasons is that China's external sector, especially for trade, has become much more diversified. So for example, trade with Belt and Road partner countries are growing by 14%. And of these total trade, private enterprises are accounting for over 57% of total trade. So the resilience is not coming just from the big corporations or the state-owned corporations, but also from a more broad commercial base. And finally, I think the domestic macroeconomic conditions were very stable to absorb part of the shock from externally. So our urban surveyed unemployment rate is around 5% in quarter one. And also the per capita disposable income is rising by 4.9% nominally and 4% in real terms. So it's important because the stable jobs and stable incomes is helping people to prevent all of the external uncertainty from immediately feeding into our daily lives. So I think overall China's quarter one performance is showing that the economy still have very strong capability of absorbing some of these shocks and to sustain the resilience.
Now, let's take a look at the specific sectors that you mentioned. First of all, the industrial output grew 6.1%, accelerating by 1.1 percentage points from the previous quarter. What were the main drivers behind this acceleration?
Yeah, I think the clearest story behind it was the upgrading of manufacturing sector. Because if we look at the breakdown, for example, the equipment manufacturing was growing by 8.9% and also high-tech manufacturing by 12.5%. So the acceleration of this industrial output was, I think, more led by the technologically intensive parts of the industry instead of the traditional industry or the heavy industry. So we can also see at the product level, for example, 3D printing devices are having an output increase by over 54%. Lithium batteries more than 40%, and industrial robots more than 33% in quarter one. So basically, the momentum is increasingly tied to these advanced manufacturing sectors and also new productive forces. So when we look at the demand conditions are also improving at the margin. So the manufacturing PMI, for example, was 50.4, so at the positive region, and also the production in operation expectation index was also very high. So the firms were not just producing more, but they're also feeling more confident at the near term in terms of orders and their activities. Also, finally, I'd like to point out that the profitability of firms are also rising. So in terms of industrial profits in the first 2 months are above 1 trillion yuan. So it's also a 15% year-on-year increase. So when firms are actually able to secure more profit, they're more willing to maintain their production, also upgrade their equipments, and also expand their output. So overall, this acceleration at the industrial side, I think, is led by better quality industry rather than simply a multiplication of the quantity.
Better quality. Then the service industry was up over 5%. What contributed to this growth at the start of this year?
Yeah, so I think to summarize, I think mostly from three parts. First is modern service sectors. So if we look at leasing and business services, these sectors grew by 12%. Information transmission, IT, and software services over more than 10%, and finance sector is growing by more than 6%. So the service increase is not just we're talking about restaurants or tourism. It's also about the modern services like digital and producer services. Also, when it comes to consumption-related services, retail sales of service is also rising by 5.5%, and also in terms of communication, information services, tourism, consultation, rental services, cultural, sports, leisure services. These are also sectors that are growing very rapidly. So we're really witnessing a consumer shift towards more experiences heavy and service heavy spending rather than just product heavy. And finally, the digital channel is also helping. For example, the online retail sales of goods and services is increasing by 8% year on year. It's almost reaching 5 trillion yuan. So part of the service sector strength is also coming from the digitalization and new consumption formats, which is supported by all of the logistics and infrastructures. So overall, we're seeing a very, I think, strong and healthy outlook of China's service sector, both from the modern side, the digital side, and also experience-based consumer services as well.
Now, boosting domestic demand is a key priority of the 15th five-year plan period, but retail sales increased by 2.4% in the first quarter. What policies are needed to further improve domestic consumption?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think the policy have to somehow raise our households' purchasing power more, consistently and more durably. So, for example, we have seen in the 2026 government report, which explicitly calls for an income growth plan and also better earnings for low-income groups, because these low-income groups, they have higher propensity to consume. So if you increase their income, they're more likely to convert that higher income into consumption. So that's very important because having a weak consumption is especially for the short or medium term, is considered one of the largest vulnerability or risk for China, at least in the short to medium term. Also, in terms of policies like trade-in programs, they should definitely continue because they're definitely clearly having an effect on Chinese consumers. For example, the government have embarked 250 billion yuan in these ultra-long special treasury bonds, and we could use those yield for consumer goods trading in 2026 because we're basically borrowing long and using these as short-term surpluses, short-term compensation, and this is going to benefit our consumption as well. And third, I think China definitely needs to do more on service consumption because the room for growth is bigger, and also service consumption combines products consumption and also provides jobs. So, for example, sectors like transportation, domestic services, tourism, sporting events, those definitely should be the focus for next steps development. And finally, I think improving consumption also needs to help households reduce their precautionary saving motive, meaning providing stronger healthcare, elderly care, childcare, and also protection against unemployment. So households will have more confidence towards spending and do not save too excessively, in terms of their income. So finally, so to put it simply, I think we need to shift from simply subsidizing purchases to also strengthening the confidence of households in order to have a bigger consumption growth.
Okay. And finally, recently the IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva hailed China's economic resilience in the face of global challenges. So what have contributed to that resilience?
Yeah, so I think in terms of policy capacity, we have a lot of buffer room for more proactive macro policies. And for example, in the recent government report, we have seen that China still have room for additional policy, partly because the central government debt is still relatively low by the major economy standards, and also we still have room for rate cuts and also reserve requirement ratio cuts. So there's plenty of room for future policy. And another source of this resilience is the depth of our industrial base and also the competitiveness of our export market. So as I mentioned, we still have we have a very good statistics of our trade in the first quarter, and we still have a very large and flexible production base, which is going to matter because the global environment is becoming more volatile and unpredictable. And finally, I think we need to have to stabilize the macroeconomic fundamentals, the unemployment, income, CPI, as I mentioned. Meanwhile, we're seeing producer prices in March is rising slightly by 5.5%. So China is having a stabilizing force in terms of, preventing the imported price inflation, but this is also part of our strength. But in the short to medium term, there's also somehow a strategic warning because we need to be able to shift from an export-heavy model towards a model led more by domestic consumption and domestic services. So this is where we need to focus more in the future.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University. This is World Today. Stay tuned. Hong Kong's IPO market has made a powerful start to 2026, gaining the top global spot for funds raised. It's reported that the city recorded 40 new listings in the first quarter, raising nearly 110 billion Hong Kong dollars, or over 14 billion US dollars, about 5 times the amount raised during the same period last year. The surge was largely driven by A+H listings, companies listed on both the Chinese mainland and in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, new stocks in artificial intelligence and the broader technology, media, and telecommunication sectors delivered standout performances. Hong Kong's IPO pipeline is also at a multi-year high, with about 400 applications awaiting approval to list in Hong Kong. For more about the Hong Kong market, we're joined by Yao Shujie, Hong Kong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, Hong Kong has surged to the top globally for IPO fundraising. What key forces are behind this, and how durable is this momentum?
I think this traditionally, Hong Kong is already an international financial hub, among one of the biggest financial centers in the world, including New York, London, Singapore, and also Tokyo. Now, Hong Kong becoming more attractive is due to a number of reasons over the last few years, and emerging to become very important and prominent in the first quarter of 2026. Particularly, I would like to point out the uncertainty at the global level, for example, like the Middle East, which has quite a strong damage on the reputation of some countries such as the United States, and also many countries that are connected to the regional conflict. And also the Ukraine-Russian crisis over the last 4 years already have some conflict and tension in the European regions. Hong Kong, is a peaceful place, and because it's connected, a part of the Greater China area, it have the sovereignty of the People's Republic, and China is a peaceful country, open economy, which welcome all kinds of foreign direct investment, including the investment into the security markets. So this is the first reason. I think the second reason is also the steady economic performance of China, which over the last few decades have been improved to be highly resilient against the international shock and conflict, including the emerging situation of COVID-19 and also the external regional conflict and hot fighting in some places. And certainly because the Chinese economy is transforming from a low level to a high level manufacturing hub of the global economy, Chinese product has become very welcome by many countries. So they provide a solid foundation supported with the real industrial strengths, particularly the manufacturing capacity and also the innovation capacity. This created a lot of opportunity for many new emerging companies to be listed, not only in mainland China, but also in Hong Kong, which is a gateway to get into the international financial system. The Hong Kong legal system, the security regulation system is highly consistent with the global financial institutions. So this is why Hong Kong become very attractive. And it is attractive in terms of the A and H listing. Basically, A represent the Chinese share, and H, represent the Hong Kong Special Administration Area share. So the A and H turned out to be a very good combination, which on the one hand, they get access to the mainland, huge market, and also have access to the external financial investors market.
And now the AI and TMT stocks, which means the technology, media, and telecommunications, are leading the gains in the listing. Why is that? And will that be a long-term fundamental or just a short-term market enthusiasm?
I think it is both. In the short term, I think the artificial intelligence become a very emerging, investment area, and because like GPT, also DeepSeek, and many other platforms which are becoming to be the major player in the international economy system. Not only the AI itself, but also the traditional industry, agriculture, manufacturing, services, now they are embedded or integrated with AI. And AI itself is also becoming an ecosystem for driving the global economy to a much higher level. And the TMT is also highly connected with AI, and it also transforming people's living style, and also the high quality improvement of the people not only in China but also in the rest of the world, particularly the industrialized nations, the more prosperous nation. They are moving upward from the basic necessity to a new territory of consumption and also a living style. So TMT, artificial intelligence, not only in the short term become very hot, but once it become mature, it will getting long-term steady attraction to international capital.
Now there's this sweet burden. With listings surging and the IPO pipeline at a multi-year high, Hong Kong is reportedly in urgent need of sponsor representatives, which means people then take responsibility for an IPO or listing application. So how can the city deal with this talent gap?
Well, it have to exploit the existing talent pool to the full potential, and also attracting new investors and also people with knowledge about security, about the financial system, about the legal system, about domestic and international markets. So you have to attract new talents into the existing pool. And if there's any shortage, there should be short-term practical on-job training, and also becoming more internationally minded, attracting foreign talent into Hong Kong, and attracting talents from mainland into Hong Kong as well.
And now there are about 400 applications waiting for the approval to list in Hong Kong. What other challenges could disrupt the successful completion of these listings?
I think it's the process of scrutiny. Although the demand is very strong, but from the security regulation point of view, they have to be a little bit cautious about the quality of application. They have to meet the law and regulation. They also have to meet the basic standard of information disclosure and assessment. So that whatever company is listed in Hong Kong is not just to attract hot money, but it's also to become a major driver of future economic development, not only in mainland China but also in the rest of the world. So this is the most important challenges: the legal scrutiny, the financial balance sheet, and other things, and also the long-term potential of this listed company. They have to be carefully examined, make sure that the kinds of push into the listing board is become a very healthy development for the new forces of the listed company in the stock market.
Okay. Now, what impact could this IPO boom have on Hong Kong's role as an international financial center, and how might it benefit the mainland economy?
Well, first of all, it consolidates and improve China's financial position in the international market. It signifies that Hong Kong not only still the most important safe place for foreign capitals, but it also shows that Hong Kong have a dynamism and also the flexibility to become highly accommodative of the new listed companies. This successful listing would certainly give the Chinese economy a strong stimulation in terms of attracting foreign capital into the domestic economy. China is finding a way of how to improve the quality of economic development. And this kinds of invested company, especially much of them are focusing on the artificial intelligence and the TMT sector, which is a major driver for China to move from the low, middle end to a higher end technological economy performance in the future. So the impact on China is number one. It provided a platform for invested companies, which is good for the real economy. And the second is to improve the China quality of the capital market, and which would deflect into or penetrate into the real economy, so that it meet the requirement of China's economic transformation from the middle income country to a higher income country in the future.
Thank you. That was Yao Shujie, Cheong Kong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University. You're listening to World Today. More to come. We'll bring you a conversation with the Speaker of the New Zealand House of Representatives. And French lawmakers approved a bill to ease the return of looted artworks. And Artemis II breaks record for farthest distance traveled from the Earth. And we'll take a short break. We'll be back after it.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombiewski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please come to join us.
You're listening to World Today with me, Do Hongyu, in Beijing. Speaker of the New Zealand House of Representatives, Jerry Brownlee, is on a visit to China until Thursday. He made the trip at the invitation of Zhao Leji, chairman of China's National People's Congress Standing Committee. During their meeting, Zhao said China is willing to work with New Zealand to implement the important consensus reached by the leaders of the two countries and promote the development of the China-New Zealand Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. He mentioned China is willing to deepen cooperation with New Zealand in traditional fields like agriculture, forestry, mechanical and electrical products, as well as emerging fields such as digital economy, green transformation, and artificial intelligence. On his part, Brownlee said his country is glad to see the tremendous achievements China has made in its development, and it attaches great importance to developing cooperation with China. Now, CGTN's Feng Yilei spoke one-on-one with him. Let's take a listen.
It's a great pleasure to have you speaking with us. How will the New Zealand Parliament promote exchanges between the two legislatures to ensure that New Zealand remains a frontrunner in China's relations with Western developed nations?
Well, New Zealand's recognition of China came in 1972, one of the first countries to have diplomatic representation with Chinese government at the time. And the first parliamentary delegation from New Zealand to China was 1977. And we've continued with that two-way exchange of legislators over all of those years. The current strategic partnership is an extension of the friendship that's grown over that time. And our position is that while we have some things that where we will have differences, we deal with those in a respectful and quiet manner to make sure that we keep the friendly relations that have been so beneficial, certainly to New Zealand, and I hope to China as well.
Leaders of both nations have expressed a shared commitment to upholding the UN-centered international system as well as the WTO-based multilateral trading regime. Against the backdrop of increasing geopolitical fragmentation and pressure on global trade, how do you assess the prospects of advancing the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific through existing frameworks such as APEC, CPTPP, and RCEP?
Well, I think the first point is that at a time when some of those rules-based systems that have worked so very well for a large number of countries around the world and that have been participated in strongly from China need to be affirmed as much as possible. So the sort of friendship between a small country like New Zealand and our Pacific neighbours as well with China in asserting that those rules are of great value to the betterment of people is something that we have to do even more strongly than before. We certainly look forward to that being either ratified or expanded during China's term as the host country for APEC. It's going to be a very, very important year for asserting the rules that have worked so well for people.
You've mentioned that China hosts APEC this year. Could you please elaborate a bit on the role that New Zealand Parliament can play in terms of helping the region to move towards a more open, innovative and cooperative Asia-Pacific? Well,
New Zealand's always had, since the 1980s, pretty much open economy, and so we welcome trade. Now, that same principle applies to every country, and you get certain expertise in different countries that can, be taken advantage of by others who wish to trade into those areas. And so the New Zealand Parliament will continue to have its multi-party commitment to a free and open trading system. And of course, New Zealand, both at official level and political level, will be very supportive of a successful APEC meeting in November.
We know that China has been New Zealand's largest goods trading partners for a decade. As global supply chains evolve and trade rules shift, how can New Zealand's parliament use its legislative and oversight functions to safeguard and expand the benefits of the China-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement?
Well, I think the first point I'd make is that New Zealand is one of 142 countries that have China as their main trading partner. And that reflects the fact that China is now, one of the biggest manufacturing countries in the world. And so a lot of manufactured goods will be imported by a lot of countries that come out of China. But the point is that where we have a world where some of those rules-based systems, particularly around tariffs and other such, looking to be re-implemented by people, we need to be able to assert very strongly that those tariffs are paid for by consumers in the country that the tariff is applied to. And so the betterment of people is where we should all be looking all of the time, and the benefits of trade are only going to be recognised if we have the sort of consumer opportunities that are unimpeded by those taxes. So New Zealand will be always a country that looks to have as few, should I say, trade barriers as possible.
Well, climate change represents an existential threat to South Pacific nations. Will the two legislatures advance cooperation in this field going forward?
One of the things that's been fascinating for me on this visit, I've been to China numerous times, is the number of EV vehicles on the roads. Those green number plates are everywhere. And China's leading the way in that particular regard. So new sources of energy, as well as renewable energy of the type that we've always had, and commitment to those, I think, will become even more important in the future. We don't have any vehicle manufacturing in New Zealand, so having access to manufactured product is very, very important. And look, in New Zealand, we've got obviously the constraints on fuel at the present time, prices rising. And the market effect of that is that even in the last month, the number of people buying EVs in New Zealand has significantly jumped up. And the vast majority of those will be from Chinese brands. And so there's a strong motivation to make changes. And I think we can see a lot of that happening.
That was Jerry Brownlee, Speaker of the New Zealand House of Representatives. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
Welcome back. French lawmakers have passed a bill to simplify the return of artworks looted during the colonial era to their countries of origin. France still holds tens of thousands of artworks and prized artifacts taken from its former colonial empire. The National Assembly unanimously approved the draft legislation this week. The bill passed the upper house in January. It will now proceed through final steps before becoming law. Designed to streamline restitution, the bill targets items acquired between 1815 and 1972. Now joining us on the line is Han Hua, co-founder and Secretary General of Beijing Club for International Dialogue. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Han.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, what's your view on the passing of this bill, and what's the historic breakthrough it signals?
It is definitely a historical breakthrough. For the first time, France is moving from symbolic, case-by-case restitution toward an institutionalized mechanism, which lowers the political benchmark for returning colonial-era cultural property. This is very historically significant, and it reframes restitution from an exceptional act into a repeatable policy tool. At the same time, I think the law's limited scope and the controlled procedures suggest this is not a wholesale rethinking of ownership, but a managed opening. So in that sense, it signals both progress in addressing historical justice and a continued effort from France to retain strategic control over the pace and terms of restitution.
Now, there's a very specific time zone in this bill. The bill applies to cultural objects acquired between 1815 and 1972. So first, why was this time frame chosen? And what types of Chinese cultural relics were taken abroad falling within this scope?
Well, the 1815 to 1972 timeframe actually reflects a legal and historical compromise. 1815 marks the post-Napoleon consolidation of modern European museum collections and the beginning of large-scale overseas acquisition, quote unquote, I would say, including those through their invasion, colonial expansion, while 1972 corresponds to the adoption of the UNESCO Convention, which established international normalities against illicit trafficking of cultural property and relics. So in practice, this window captures many objects removed during periods of imperial expansion, invasion, as I just said, and unequal encounters. For China, this would include relics taken in the late Qing dynasty and the early Republican periods, such as the bronzes, ceramics, manuscripts, palace objects from Beijing, removed during events like the Second Opium War, when the imperial collections, including those from the old Summer Palace, even including the Forbidden City, were widely dispersed into the European collections.
And then why is this retrieval process that difficult? I mean, according to the China Cultural Relics Society, since the Opium War in 1840, over 10 million Chinese cultural relics have been lost to countries and regions including Europe, the United States, Japan, and Southeast Asia. And only about 150,000, that's only 1.5% of that total, have been returned. So what has made relics restitution that difficult?
Well, my number is about 17 million, so even larger. But I want to say something about the difficulties. I think it lies in a combination of legal, political, diplomatic, and the practical constraints, because many countries, including France, treat national museum collections as inalienable state property, meaning they cannot be returned without specific legislation. So this is often, before this specific, even case-by-case legislation, it will make it very hard to establish. So even before this procedure of legislation, it is very hard for countries like China to establish very clear legal claims without any legislation framework. And over time, artifacts have passed through multiple private and public hands, so many channels, so many different hands. So further complicating the ownership and this process of the ownership. So, and in addition, restitution is really a purely legal matter. It intersects with diplomacy, like I just said, market interests, and national narratives about heritage. How we build our national narratives is also a crucial part of this whole process. So as a result, even when moral arguments are strong, the absence of binding international legal enforcement mechanism and the high evidentiality threshold make the large-scale returns extremely slow and selective.
And then what positive impact could this new bill have on China's efforts to trace and recover its cultural artifacts abroad, particularly from France?
Yeah, because France, their legislation work is ready. So this law could create a very predictable and accessible pathway for starting the whole process of restitution, which is most immediate positive impact to China. By shifting from the ad hoc legislation to a more structured, systematic review mechanism, it lowers the procedural barriers and signals greater political willingness to engage. For China, this may facilitate these targeted claims where this can be reasonably documented, especially for high-profile objects in French public collections in those museums. More broadly, it strengthens the normative environment around the whole process of restitution, encouraging dialogue, joint research, joint legal work, paper document preparation, and even some alternative arrangements such as long-term loans to those museums or shared curation. So while it will not fundamentally resolve the scale gap, like we just discussed, the huge number, but it can provide a clearer institutional channel through which China can advance its recovery efforts.
Okay, a constitutional channel. Thank you very much. That was Han Hua, co-founder and Secretary General of Beijing Club for International Dialogue. Coming up, Artemis II breaks record for the farthest distance traveled from the Earth. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I am Dr. Digby James Wren, a political analyst and international relations scholar specializing in China area studies. World Today offers unmatched in-depth perspectives on China's politics, economics, business, technology and society. World Today's team of reporters and contributors provides valuable information from all of the world's major economies. I hope you can join me on World Today for the very best insights and news from China, on China, and help to build a better understanding of China's role in the world today.
Welcome back. NASA's lunar flyby mission Artemis II has set a new record for the farthest distance humans have traveled from the Earth. The crew aboard the Orion spacecraft flew more than 250,000 miles away, beating the record set by Apollo 13 in 1970. The mission, launched on April the 1st, marked the first crewed trip to the moon in over 50 years. 4 astronauts circled the moon and collected images and data during the 10-day flight. NASA says the mission will support future lunar landings and deeper space exploration. For more, my colleague Lian Qingxuan spoke with Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy at the Beijing Normal University.
The Artemis II has set a new record for the farthest distance humans have traveled from Earth. So what does this mean for humanity's broader exploration of deep space?
Right. So this is somewhat of a milestone, although it's a very small step. So it surpassed Apollo 13's 1970 record. So it's slightly going further away. So in terms of significance, each step is always important. It's a very incremental process. So the next step is perhaps going further away towards traveling to Mars eventually. When you go further away from Earth, there's a whole bunch of problems. So first of all, the moon is in fact somewhat protected by Earth's magnetic field, which means when the sun blasts lots of particles, so those particles, if they hit you, those are highly energetic particles, it would break your DNA, cause cancer, and all sorts of problems. The moon is partially protected by Earth's magnetic field, but if you go further away, on the backside away in that direction, then that protection gets attenuated. So this means each further step, you further away with actual humans, you collect important information on how this kind of radiation shield you need to actually survive out there. And also further away from Earth, communication becomes more difficult. So your spacecraft needs to be more autonomous. It needs to be able to navigate without relying too much on Earth's navigation systems like GPS. It doesn't work that well if you're very far away from Earth. So all of that systems gets tested. So it's a small step, but it's an important one.
Mm-hmm. And Artemis II used the moon's gravity to help adjust its trajectory and save fuel. So can you elaborate more on this? And what role does it play in reducing cost and extending mission capability?
So it's something called gravitational slingshot. Essentially, there's always this attractive gravitational force between the moon and your spacecraft. So if you approach the moon in the right direction, the moon is ahead of you and you're trying to accelerate, then the moon's attraction onto you would drag you along in the same direction that the moon is traveling. So that gives you a boost in velocity if you approach it correctly. If you approach it in the wrong direction, it will actually slow you down. But anyways, so this is a typical thing that people use when they are trying to travel to further away locations without having to carry lots of fuel, because, launching heavy fuel from Earth is a very costly sort of adventure. So if you want to go to Mars, for example, one good idea would be to use the gravitational slingshot by the moon to give you an extra boost towards Mars. And also for this particular case, it's more for safety. They used a very delicately designed orbit, which means the spacecraft will return to Earth just by moon's gravitational effect alone. You don't need to burn any fuel. So this is very safe, because if your engine gets into trouble, then you return to Earth by default. So this is actually a very smart that they've been doing, and the fact that it was so successful is very confident boosting in terms of future sort of human exploration of the moon, both by the Artemis mission and possibly follow on, permanent stay on the moon and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very smart and safe. But given the current geopolitical tensions like the US-Iran conflict and NASA's long-standing vulnerability to budget cuts and policy changes, so do you think US can still achieve its return to the moon goals on schedule?
They have an extremely aggressive schedule. They want to go there by 2028, if I remember correctly. So that's very close. But on the other hand, their technology, their blueprint is also extremely aggressive. They're using this SLS, very large rocket, using hydrogen oxygen first stage rocket. The hydrogen is really difficult to work with. It makes the metal surrounding it brittle. So building a huge first stage rocket using that is very challenging. And also the landing vehicle to be supplied by SpaceX, they've been testing this humongous spaceship, but it hasn't flown wholly successfully yet. So I don't know whether they will be able to go there by 2028. I think if it was me, I would give people more time to develop it. But if push comes to shove, and if they bear a lot of risk, both on the rockets and on the humans being carried there, it's possible that they may push this through. So I wouldn't say definitively either way.
And the US Artemis program is moving from lunar landings toward a long-term presence on the moon. Compared with this, China's lunar exploration program seems to follow a different path. So what are the main differences?
So the U.S. program, it has evolved over the time. Both the public and the commercial sort of entities have refocused more towards the moon. So in the past, they've been looking at Mars with more interest because they've been to the moon. There's less of a bragging right. But maybe they realized, going to Mars is more of a challenge than people initially expected. So they are now focusing on going to the moon, but using it in a more commercial way, doing a more substantial thing on the moon. There are even proposals to mine the moon, for example, for resources like water, and then just using electrical propulsion to launch those resources into orbit, so people can use that for further deep space exploration. So all sorts of science fiction-y sounding sort of project is being planned right now. So there is a shift of focus from Mars to the moon. So this is the US narrative. Obviously, at this stage, it's always sort of a trend and an oscillation. When people get excited about the moon, all sorts of quite aggressive sort of programs get proposed. In the end, people will perhaps dial back and settle onto something more achievable. But right now, the US program is highly aggressive. They want to put a lot of people permanently on the moon, doing a lot of mining sort of industry on the moon. China, on the other hand, is a very sort of step-by-step, gradual, incremental approach. So China also will put a sort of international lunar research station on the moon. But at least initially for the first phase, it wouldn't be permanently mined. It would just be a whole bunch of sort of individual landers, each serving a particular purpose. Some are communication towers, some are power plants, and they link together into some sort of a rough skeleton of a base. So when humans go there, they can use those things, but it's not going to be like a dormitory, giant building, that kind of a base. So China, at least before 2035, the human landing will be 2030, and before 2035, you would have all this kind of a basic infrastructure available. And then beyond that is still under plan. So as you can see, at least during the planning stage, the China's program is much more moderate than the US one.
Mm-hmm. And as you've mentioned before, the US put a lot of people and money on the moon, mining, etc. And some say that Artemis II is seen as a step toward unlocking a potential lunar economy. How do you view this, and what inspiration does it give to China?
It really depends on where you want to go, because launching from Earth is highly expensive, because Earth has a very strong gravitational field, but also Earth has a thick atmosphere. So when you're launching a rocket from Earth, it has to puncture through that atmosphere. There's a lot of drag, a lot of friction. So launching anything from Earth is not really a cost-effective way of doing things. So if you want to build up a space economy, you want to manufacture in the space environment, or you want to go into deeper space, a viable way of doing that is to actually grab resources, whatever you can, from the moon and launch it out of the moon, which is much easier. If that's your goal, then there's certainly a lunar economy in the future. There are also talks about things like helium-3 possible for fusion fuel, but that's kind of neither here nor there, because the current fusion technology being developed doesn't use that kind of fuel. That technology is just a potential. It isn't really being seriously investigated just yet. But regardless, the moon is at least a really good place to do science on. So if you include sort of science and technology development into your economic calculations, then because, the Earth is getting crowded in terms of all sorts of noises, signals, satellites are blasting radio signals from space, then at least you can't do astronomy on Earth very effectively. You may go to the backside of the moon, which is shielded from all this noise, and you can substantially extend your reach with astronomy. So there are a lot of things you can do on the moon. And in terms of inspiration for China, some of the idea, China has this very incremental step. It doesn't extend itself too much. So in the end, who knows, some of these ideas, they may be pursued too aggressively by the US initially. And then they burn through so much piles of money that the program, the scheduling is too aggressive and it has to be cut. And in the end, sort of a slow and gradual approach may actually end up realizing things. So we see this happen in other areas too. So the slow and steady sometimes actually wins. So yeah, China certainly is also looking at what kind of economic activities you can do on the moon. But in terms of practically doing it, it's a whole different approach.
That was Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy with Beijing Normal University, talking with my colleague Lian Qingxuan. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. A recap of today's headlines. China's GDP grew by 5% in the first quarter. Also in this period, the Hong Kong market ranked the first in IPO fundraising. And we brought you a conversation with the Speaker of the New Zealand House of Representatives. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.